The dust kicked up in perfect spirals as the military transport truck rumbled through the gates of Fort Bragg. In the back, among a dozen other fresh-faced recruits, sat a young woman who looked no different from any other soldier beginning their journey. Her uniform was crisp, her posture straight, and her eyes held that mixture of determination and nervousness that marked every new arrival to one of America's most prestigious military installations. Her name was Sarah Chen, according to the paperwork. Clutched in her hands. 22 years old, college graduate, no prior military experience. To everyone around her, she was just another recruit who had decided to serve her country. The drill sergeants who would soon be screaming in her face saw nothing special about her. The administrative staff processing her paperwork treated her with the same efficient indifference they showed everyone else. Even her fellow recruits, stealing glances at each other as they tried to size up their competition, saw nothing that set her apart from the crowd. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Sarah Chen carried a secret that would have changed everything. If anyone had known, hidden beneath her ordinary appearance and standard issue gear was a truth so extraordinary that it would eventually shake the very foundations of the military hierarchy she was now entering. For now, though, she was content to blend in, to be treated exactly like every other recruit stepping off that truck and into their new reality. The processing center buzzed with activity as dozens of new arrivals were sorted, documented, and prepared for their initial training. Sarah moved through the lines with quiet efficiency, answering questions when asked, following instructions without complaint. The medical staff checked her vitals and found them excellent. The equipment sergeant issued her gear and noted her size on his clipboard. The administrative clerk typed her information into the system and handed her a temporary ID badge, never once looking up from his computer screen. "Next," he called out, already reaching for the paperwork of the recruit behind her. Sarah's bunk assignment was in Barrack C, 3rd floor, bed number 47. She climbed the stairs with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, passing other recruits who were settling into their new temporary homes. The barracks were exactly what she had expected: institutional, functional, and designed to strip away any sense of individuality. Gray walls, metal bed frames, and lockers that would hold all of their worldly possessions for the next several months. Her bunkmate was a talkative young man from Texas named Rodriguez, who immediately launched into his life story the moment Sarah set her bag down. He had joined the military to follow in his father's footsteps, he explained, and was determined to make it through the grueling training program ahead of them. Sarah listened politely, offering appropriate responses when required, but revealed very little about herself beyond the basics that were already in her file. "So what made you join up?" Rodriguez asked as they began unpacking their belongings. "I wanted to serve," Sarah replied simply, folding her civilian clothes with the same precision she had learned to apply to everything else in her life. "My country needs people who are willing to step up." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, the kind of response any patriotic young American might give. Rodriguez nodded approvingly and launched into his own theories about duty and honor, never noticing that Sarah's answer had revealed absolutely nothing about her true motivations or background. The first few days at Fort Bragg followed a predictable pattern: wake-up call at 0500 hours, followed by physical training, meals, orientation sessions, and endless paperwork. Sarah performed every task with quiet competence, never excelling enough to draw attention, but never falling behind enough to earn criticism. She ran her miles at a steady pace, completed her push-ups and sit-ups with proper form, and absorbed the flood of information being thrown at the recruits about military protocol, chain of command, and basic procedures. Her drill sergeant, staff Sergeant Martinez, was a 20-year veteran who had seen thousands of recruits pass through his training programs. He prided himself on being able to read people quickly, to identify the potential leaders, the troublemakers, and the ones who wouldn't make it through the first month. When he looked at Sarah Chen, he saw a competent but unremarkable recruit who would probably perform adequately throughout her training and go on to have a solid, if unspectacular, military career. He had no way of knowing that his assessment was exactly what Sarah had been hoping for. During the evening hours, when the recruits were given limited free time to write letters home, clean their equipment, or simply rest, Sarah would sit on her bunk and write in a small notebook. To anyone watching, she appeared to be keeping a journal, documenting her experiences as so many soldiers had done before her. In reality, she was maintaining a detailed record of everything she observed about the base's operations, the training procedures, and the personalities of the people around her. Her fellow recruits began to settle into their own patterns and form the social hierarchies that inevitably develop in any group of young people thrown together under stressful circumstances. Sarah navigated these dynamics with practiced ease, making herself useful without becoming indispensable, friendly without becoming close to anyone, and competent without drawing unwanted attention to her abilities. The morning of their first real training exercise dawned gray and cold, with a biting wind that seemed to cut right through their newly issued fatigues. Sarah stood in formation with the rest of her unit, listening as Staff Sergeant Martinez outlined the day's objectives. They would be conducting basic field maneuvers, learning to work as a team while navigating a series of obstacles and challenges, designed to test their physical conditioning and mental resilience. Today, you maggots are going to learn what it really means to be soldiers, Martinez barked, his voice carrying easily across the assembled recruits. You're going to crawl through mud, climb over walls, and push yourselves harder than you've ever been pushed before. Some of you will rise to the challenge. Others will wash out. That's not my problem. That's your problem. Sarah absorbed the speech with the same impassive expression she had worn for everything else during her first week at Fort Bragg. Around her, she could see the mixture of excitement and apprehension on her fellow recruits' faces. Some were practically bouncing on their toes, eager to prove themselves. Others looked like they were already regretting their decision to enlist. The obstacle course stretched out before them like a gauntlet designed by someone with a particularly sadistic imagination. Rope climbs, wall traversals, crawling sections through mud and barbed wire, and a series of increasingly difficult physical challenges that would test every aspect of their training so far. Sarah studied each obstacle with the analytical mind that had been honed through years of training that her fellow recruits couldn't even imagine. "Chun," Martinez's voice cut through her assessment. "You're up first. Let's see what you've got." Sarah stepped forward without hesitation, her movements fluid and confident despite the challenging terrain ahead. She approached the first obstacle, a series of hurdles that required precise timing and coordination, and began her run. Her form was textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, her pace steady but not flashy. She cleared each hurdle with exactly the right amount of effort, never struggling but never making it look effortless either. The rope climb came next, and Sarah attacked it with the same methodical approach. Hand over hand, her technique was solid and efficient, carrying her to the top at a pace that was respectable but not remarkable. She rang the bell at the summit and rappelled down with the controlled descent of someone who had clearly practiced the maneuver before, though not so smoothly as to suggest extensive experience. As she moved through each subsequent obstacle, Sarah maintained the same careful balance between competence and ordinariness. She belly crawled through the mud under the barbed wire without getting caught or slowing down, but she also emerged looking appropriately disheveled and tired. Her performance on the wall traverse was solid, her technique on the balance beam was steady, and her final sprint to the finish line was exactly what might be expected from a reasonably athletic college graduate in good physical condition. Staff Sergeant Martinez checked his stopwatch and made a note on his clipboard. Not bad, Chun, middle of the pack. Keep working on your upper body strength, and you might make something of yourself. Sarah nodded respectfully and stepped aside to let the next recruit attempt the course. She watched as Rodriguez struggled with the rope climb, his technique inefficient, and his breathing labored. Another recruit, a former high school athlete named Thompson, attacked the obstacles with impressive speed and strength, but made several small errors that cost him valuable time. A third recruit, Wilson, had clearly never done any serious physical training in his life and barely managed to complete the course within the time limit. Throughout the morning, Sarah observed not just her fellow recruits' performances, but also the way the instructors evaluated them, the criteria they seemed to be using, and the subtle signs that indicated which recruits were being marked as potential leaders or specialists. She noticed which mistakes earned sharp criticism and which achievements were acknowledged with grudging approval. During the lunch break, as the recruits sat in the mess hall nursing their bruises and comparing their experiences, Sarah listened to the conversations swirling around her. Thompson was already being treated as the unofficial leader of their group, his natural athleticism and confident demeanor having marked him as someone to watch. Rodriguez was developing a reputation as the class clown, using humor to deflect attention from his physical limitations. Wilson was quietly being written off by his peers as someone who probably wouldn't make it through the full training program. "How do you think you did out there?" Rodriguez asked Sarah as they worked their way through plates of institutional food that somehow managed to be both bland and oversalted at the same time. "I think I did okay," Sarah replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "There's definitely room for improvement, but I felt like I held my own." It was exactly the kind of modest, realistic self-assessment that any reasonable person might make after their first serious training exercise. Rodriguez nodded and turned the conversation toward his own performance, launching into a detailed analysis of where he had succeeded and where he had failed. Sarah continued to listen, filing away information about her fellow recruits' strengths, weaknesses, and psychological profiles. She was building a comprehensive picture of the group dynamics, the training methodology, and the institutional culture of Fort Bragg. All of this information would be valuable in the weeks and months ahead, though none of her fellow recruits could have imagined why. The afternoon brought classroom instruction on military history, weapon systems, and tactical procedures. Sarah took notes with the same diligent attention she had shown throughout her academic career, asking occasional questions that demonstrated she was paying attention without revealing any specialized knowledge. She was to all appearances exactly what she seemed to be, a smart, dedicated recruit who was working hard to master the basics of military life. 3 weeks into her training at Fort Bragg, Sarah Chen had successfully established herself as exactly what she appeared to be, a competent, unremarkable recruit who was progressing through the program at a steady, predictable pace. She had found her place in the unofficial hierarchy of her training unit, neither at the top nor at the bottom, but comfortably in the middle where she attracted minimal attention from both her peers and her instructors. The days had settled into a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly comforting in its predictability. Each morning began with the harsh sound of the reveille at 05:00 hours, followed by physical training that pushed every recruit to their limits. Sarah participated in these sessions with the same controlled effort she had displayed from the beginning, always keeping pace with the group, but never standing out as either the strongest or the weakest performer. Her running times were consistently in the middle of the pack, fast enough to avoid criticism, but not so fast as to earn special recognition. Her performance in strength training exercises followed the same pattern, with steady improvement that suggested natural athletic ability, combined with hard work, but nothing that would mark her as exceptional. Even her marksmanship scores, when they finally made it to the shooting range, were exactly what might be expected from someone with no prior firearms experience, but good hand-eye coordination and the Ability to follow instructions, Staff Sergeant. Martinez had settled into treating Sarah with the same professional indifference he showed toward most of his recruits. She wasn't a problem child who required constant correction, nor was she a standout performer who warranted special attention. She was, in his estimation, the kind of solid, dependable soldier who would form the backbone of any effective military unit, valuable in her own way, but not particularly noteworthy. "Chun's doing fine," he told his fellow instructors during one of their regular evaluation meetings. "She's got her head on straight, follows orders without question, and seems to be adapting well to military life. I'd say she's on track for a standard assignment after graduation, probably something in logistics or administration, where she can put that college education to good use." It was exactly the kind of assessment Sarah had been working to earn. She had carefully calibrated her performance to project competence without excellence, dedication without obsession, and intelligence without brilliance. Every aspect of her behavior had been designed to fit the profile of a recruit who would complete her training successfully and go on to serve honorably in whatever capacity the military deemed appropriate. Her relationships her fellow recruits had developed along similarly predictable lines. Rodriguez continued to be her primary bunkmate and casual friend, sharing stories about his family in Texas and his dreams of eventually becoming a career soldier. Thompson had emerged as the unofficial leader of their group, his natural charisma and athletic ability making him popular with both the recruits and the instructors. Wilson had indeed washed out during the second week, unable to meet the physical demands of the training program. Sarah navigated these social dynamics with the same careful attention she paid to everything else. She was friendly enough to be well-liked, but not so outgoing as to become the center of attention. She was helpful when asked, but never pushed herself forward as a leader. She participated in the casual conversations that filled the brief periods of downtime, but rarely initiated them herself and was careful never to reveal more about her background than what was already in her official file. The other recruits had begun to develop their own theories about Sarah's motivations and background. Some assumed she was one of those idealistic college graduates who had joined the military out of a sense of patriotic duty. Others figured she was probably looking for job security and career advancement opportunities. A few suspected she might be running from something in her civilian life, though they couldn't imagine what that might be given her apparently clean record and stable demeanor. All of these theories were perfectly reasonable, and Sarah did nothing to discourage any of them. She answered direct questions about her past with the same basic information that was already available in her official records, and deflected more probing inquiries with the kind of polite but firm boundaries that many people maintain about their personal lives. The training itself was progressing through increasingly complex and demanding phases. After mastering the basic physical conditioning and obstacle courses, the recruits had moved on to weapons training, tactical exercises, and simulated combat scenarios. Sarah approached each new challenge with the same methodical competence she had displayed from the beginning, learning quickly but not too quickly, asking appropriate questions, and making the kinds of mistakes that were normal for someone with her supposed background. During weapons training, she demonstrated the steady hands and good eye coordination that might be expected from someone who had played sports in college. Her initial attempts at field stripping and reassembling rifles were clumsy, but showed rapid improvement with practice. Her understanding of tactical concepts was solid, suggesting intelligence and analytical thinking, but she needed the same amount of explanation and repetition as any other recruit to master the more complex procedures. The simulated combat exercises were perhaps the most challenging aspect of maintaining her carefully constructed persona. These scenarios required split-second decision-making, leadership under pressure, and the ability to think tactically while under stress. Sarah found herself walking a particularly fine line during these exercises, needing to perform well enough to avoid concern about her suitability for military service, while not performing so well as to raise questions about where she might have acquired such skills. She solved this problem by developing what appeared to be a natural talent for following orders and supporting her teammates, rather than taking initiative or demonstrating tactical brilliance. When Thompson emerged as the natural leader during group exercises, Sarah positioned herself as a reliable second-in-command who could be counted on to execute orders efficiently and help coordinate the actions of less experienced team members. This approach earned her respect from both her peers and her instructors without raising any uncomfortable questions about her background or capabilities. She was seen as someone who worked well within the military's hierarchical structure and could be trusted to perform her assigned duties competently and without complaint. It was during the 5th week of training that the first hint of Sarah's true nature began to emerge, though it happened so subtly that almost no one noticed. The exercise was a nighttime navigation challenge designed to test the recruits' ability to find their way through unfamiliar terrain using only a compass, a map, and the limited visibility provided by a quarter moon. The recruits had been divided into teams of 4 and given coordinates for a series of checkpoints they needed to reach within a specified time limit. Sarah found herself grouped with Rodriguez, Thompson, and a quiet recruit named Martinez who had joined their unit the previous week. Thompson immediately assumed leadership of the team, as had become his habit, and began studying the map with the intense concentration of someone determined to prove his worth. "Okay, team," Thompson announced, his voice carrying the confidence that had made him popular with both recruits and instructors. "First checkpoint is approximately 2 clicks northeast of our current position. We'll move in single file, maintain radio silence unless there's an emergency, and stick to the planned route no matter what." Sarah nodded along with the others. But as they began their trek through the darkened forest, she found herself automatically processing information that Thompson was missing. The wind direction, the subtle sounds of nocturnal wildlife, the way the moonlight filtered through the canopy, all of these details were painting a picture of their environment that went far beyond what could be gleaned from a simple topographical map. 20 minutes into their journey, Thompson called a halt. "Something's not right," he whispered, studying his compass with growing frustration. "According to my calculations, we should have reached the first checkpoint by now." Sarah glanced at her own compass and immediately understood the problem. Thompson had been leading them in a direction that was off by approximately 15 degrees, not enough to be immediately obvious, but sufficient to throw off their navigation significantly over the distance they had traveled. "Maybe we took a wrong turn back at that creek crossing," Rodriguez suggested, his voice betraying the nervousness that always crept in when he was under pressure. "No, I marked that on the map," Thompson replied, though he was beginning to sound less certain than usual. "The route should be correct." Sarah found herself facing a dilemma that went to the heart of her carefully maintained cover. She could see exactly what had gone wrong and how to fix it, but correcting Thompson's error would require her to demonstrate navigation skills that went well beyond what might be expected from a college graduate with no military experience. At the same time, allowing the team to fail the exercise would draw unwanted attention and potentially raise questions about her own competence. She chose a middle path, one that would allow her to help without revealing too much about her capabilities. "Thompson," she said quietly, "what if we double-check our bearing from here? I think I might have spotted a landmark that could help us confirm our position." She pointed toward a distinctive rock formation that was barely visible in the moonlight, one that appeared on their topographical map as a reference point. Thompson studied the formation and then looked back at his map, his expression gradually shifting from confusion to understanding. "You're right," he said after a moment. "If that's the formation marked here, then we're about 200 meters south of where I thought we were. Good catch, Chen." Sarah nodded modestly, as if she had simply been observant rather than skilled. I just remembered noticing it on the map during our briefing. The correction allowed Thompson to recalculate their route and get the team back on track. They reached the first checkpoint with minutes to spare and continued through the exercise. With renewed confidence, Sarah continued to offer subtle assistance throughout the night, always framing her suggestions as questions or observations rather than direct corrections, and always giving Thompson the credit for their successful navigation. When they finally returned to base as the sun was beginning to rise, their team was among the first to complete the exercise successfully. Staff Sergeant Martinez acknowledged their performance with a brief nod of approval, noting their time and efficiency in his logbook. "Good work, Thompson," Martinez said. "You're showing real leadership potential. Keep this up, and you might find yourself with some additional responsibilities." Thompson beamed with pride, and Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction at having helped her teammates succeed while maintaining her own carefully constructed profile. But as the other recruits began sharing stories about their own challenges during the exercise, she noticed something that made her slightly uneasy. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the base's deputy training commander, was standing near the debriefing area, observing the returning teams with unusual interest. Sarah had seen him around the base before, but always at a distance and always in the company of other senior officers. His presence at a routine training exercise seemed somewhat out of place, especially given the early hour and the fact that such evaluations were typically handled by the drill sergeant Stades. Thompson recounted their successful navigation to the other recruits, occasionally crediting Sarah's observations. Sarah noticed that Harrison's attention seemed to focus on her for just a moment longer than might be expected. It was a subtle thing, barely noticeable, but it made her acutely aware that her performance might not be going as unnoticed as she had hoped. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rest of the day proceeded normally, with classroom instruction on military law and regulations followed by equipment maintenance and preparation for the next phase of their training. Sarah participated in all activities with her usual competent but unremarkable performance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during the night exercise. That evening, as she sat on her bunk writing in her journal, Rodriguez approached with the kind of casual curiosity that had become familiar over their weeks of training together. "Hey, Chun," he said, settling onto his own bunk. "I wanted to thank you for your help out there last night. That spot you made about the rock formation probably saved us from failing the exercise." "It was nothing," Sarah replied, not looking up from her writing. "Just got lucky with the observation." "Maybe," Rodriguez said, "but you seem to have a knack for noticing things that other people miss. Have you done any hiking or camping before? You seemed pretty comfortable out there in the dark." It was exactly the kind of innocent question that Sarah had been anticipating and preparing for since her arrival at Fort Bragg. She had a ready answer that would explain her apparent outdoor skills without revealing anything significant about her background. "I did some backpacking in college," she said, which was technically true, though it left out the more relevant details about her training. "Nothing too serious, just weekend trips with friends. I guess some of it stuck with me." Rodriguez nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "That makes sense. I grew up in the city, so all this outdoor stuff is completely new to me. I'm just glad we had someone on the team who knew what they were doing." Sarah smiled and returned to her journal, but her mind was already working through the implications of the night's events. She had managed to help her team succeed without drawing too much attention to herself, but she was beginning to realize that maintaining her cover might be more challenging than she had initially anticipated. The change in attention was subtle. At first, so slight that Sarah might have dismissed it as paranoia if her training hadn't taught her to notice even the smallest shifts in her environment. It began with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison appearing at more of their training exercises, always maintaining a professional distance but observing with the kind of focused attention that suggested more than casual interest. During their 7th week of training, as the recruits were learning advanced marksmanship techniques, Sarah noticed Harrison standing at the edge of the shooting range, clipboard in hand, making notes as each recruit took their turn at the firing line. When it was Sarah's turn, she approached the exercise with the same methodical competence she had displayed throughout her training, carefully moderating her performance to match the skills of someone learning to shoot for the first time. Her shots were grouped reasonably well, showing the steady improvement that might be expected from someone with good hand-eye coordination and the ability to follow instructions. A few shots were slightly off target, the kind of minor errors that were normal for a novice marksman, still learning to compensate for wind and distance. Her overall score was respectable, but not exceptional, placing her in the middle of the pack where she had consistently remained throughout all aspects of her training. Staff Sergeant Martinez reviewed her target and made his usual note on the scoring sheet. "Good progress, Chen. Your grouping is getting tighter. Keep working on your breathing technique and you'll be scoring expert level before you know it." Sarah nodded and began cleaning her rifle, but she was acutely aware of Harrison's continued presence at the range. As she worked, she noticed him speaking quietly with Martinez, their conversation too low for her to overhear, but clearly focused on the recruit's performance. When Martinez gestured toward her target, Sarah felt a familiar tension in her shoulders that she had to consciously force herself to relax. After the shooting exercise, the recruits moved on to tactical movement drills, practicing the basic maneuvers they would need to know for operating in combat situations. Sarah participated with her usual competence, following orders precisely and demonstrating the kind of steady improvement that suggested natural ability combined with hard work. But throughout the exercise, she was aware of Harrison's continued observation, his attention seeming to focus on her more frequently than on the other recruits. During the lunch break, Thompson approached her with the easy confidence that had made him popular with their entire unit. "Hey, Chun, I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison has been showing up at a lot of our training exercises lately?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she was pleased that Thompson had noticed the same pattern she had been tracking. "Now that you mention it, yeah, he does seem to be around more often than usual. Why do you ask?" "I was talking to some of the guys from the other training units, and they said he doesn't usually pay this much attention to routine exercises. They're thinking maybe he's evaluating someone in our group for some kind of special assignment or advanced training program." This was exactly the kind of development Sarah had been hoping to avoid. If Harrison was indeed evaluating recruits for special assignments, it could mean that someone had noticed abilities or characteristics that she had been working to conceal. The thought that she might be under consideration for additional scrutiny was deeply concerning. "Any idea who he might be looking at?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Well, everyone assumes it's me," Thompson replied with the kind of matter-of-fact confidence that might have seemed arrogant from anyone else. "I mean, I've been leading most of the team exercises, and my scores have been consistently at the top of the class. But honestly, I've noticed him watching you too." And Rodriguez said he thought Harrison was taking notes specifically about your performance during that night navigation exercise. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. If Harrison was indeed taking specific note of her performance, it meant that her carefully calibrated facade might not be working as well as she had hoped. The night navigation exercise had been the first time she had allowed any hint of her true capabilities to show through, and if that had been enough to attract official attention, she would need to be even more careful going forward. "I doubt he's paying any special attention to me," Sarah said, managing to inject just the right note of self-deprecation into her voice. "I'm pretty much the definition of average around here." "Maybe," Thompson said, "but average doesn't usually get personal attention from deputy training commanders. Just keep your eyes open, okay? If there's some kind of special opportunity coming up, I want to make sure our whole team is ready for it. The afternoon brought hand-to-hand combat training, an exercise that Sarah had been particularly dreading because it would be almost impossible to completely conceal her level of skill. She had spent considerable time developing techniques for appearing to learn combat moves for the first time, while actually drawing on years of advanced training. As the instructor demonstrated basic defensive maneuvers, Sarah practiced them with the awkward precision of someone who was intellectually understanding the concepts but still working to integrate them into muscle memory. When paired with Rodriguez for sparring practice, she allowed him to successfully execute several moves against her, while demonstrating just enough natural reflexes to avoid seeming completely helpless. "You're getting pretty good at this," Rodriguez commented as they worked through a series of grappling exercises. "Have you done any martial arts before?" "Just some self-defense classes in college," Sarah replied, which was technically true, though it left out the more extensive training that had actually prepared her for this moment. Nothing too serious. But as they continued the exercise, Sarah became increasingly aware of Harrison's presence at the edge of the training area. He was watching the sparring matches with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was evaluating specific techniques and capabilities, not just general performance. When the instructor called for a rotation of partners, Sarah found herself paired with Thompson, whose natural athleticism and competitive spirit made him a more challenging opponent to manage. Thompson approached their sparring session with the same intensity he brought to everything else, clearly viewing it as an opportunity to demonstrate his leadership and physical capabilities. Sarah had to work carefully to give him a competitive match without revealing the full extent of her own skills, allowing him to score points while demonstrating just enough ability to make it interesting. "Nice work, Chun," Thompson said as they finished their session. "You've got good instincts for someone who's new to this." Sarah nodded her thanks, but she was troubled by the compliment. If her instincts were good enough to be noticed by Thompson, they might be good enough to be noticed by Harrison as well. As the day's training concluded and the recruits returned to their barracks, Sarah found herself facing a troubling realization. Her cover might not be as secure as she had believed. The summons came at 0630 hours on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a crisp young corporal who found Sarah in the mess hall finishing her breakfast. The message was brief and official. She was to report to Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's office immediately after morning PT, wearing her Class A uniform and bringing her complete service record. Sarah's pulse quickened slightly, though she was careful to maintain the same calm expression she had worn throughout her training. Around her, the other recruits continued their conversations about the upcoming field exercise, oblivious to the fact that one of their number had just been called to meet with one of the base's senior officers. "Wonder what that's about," Rodriguez commented, glancing at the official message in Sarah's hand. "You're not in trouble, are you?" "I doubt it," Sarah replied, though internally she was running through every possible scenario that might have led to this meeting. "Probably just some administrative thing about my records or assignment." Thompson looked up from his own breakfast tray with the kind of casual interest that had become familiar over their weeks of training together. "Maybe they're finally recognizing your potential. I told you Harrison had been watching our training exercises more closely lately." Sarah forced a smile and finished her coffee, but her mind was already racing through the implications of the meeting. If Harrison was conducting individual interviews with recruits, it could mean any number of things, from routine administrative reviews to evaluations for special assignments. The fact that she had been specifically requested to bring her service record suggested that this was more than a casual check-in. The morning PT session seemed to drag on forever, though Sarah participated with her usual competent but unremarkable performance. She ran her miles at a steady pace, completed her calisthenics with proper form, and contributed to her team's performance in the group exercises without drawing any unusual attention. But throughout the entire session, she was acutely aware of the clock ticking toward her appointment with Harrison. At 0900 hours sharp, Sarah stood outside Harrison's office wearing her dress uniform and carrying a manila folder containing her complete service record. The office was located in the base's main administrative building, an imposing structure that housed the senior command staff and visiting dignitaries. Sarah had never been inside the building before, and she was struck by the contrast between its formal atmosphere and the functional simplicity of the training facilities where she had spent the previous 2 months. "Private Chun reporting, as ordered, sir," Sarah announced after being given permission to enter Harrison's office. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was a man in his early 50s, with the kind of bearing that suggested decades of military service, and the confidence that came from successfully navigating the complexities of military hierarchy. His office was precisely organized, with commendations and photographs arranged on the walls in perfect alignment, and his desk cleared of everything except the materials directly related to their meeting. "At ease, Private," Harrison said, gesturing toward a chair positioned directly across from his desk. "Please, have a seat. I wanted to speak with you about your performance during training and discuss some potential opportunities that might be available to you." Sarah settled into the chair and placed her service record on the desk, careful to maintain the posture and demeanor of a recruit who was honored to be meeting with a senior officer, but not entirely sure why she had been selected for this attention. "First, I want to commend you on your progress during training," Harrison continued, opening what appeared to be a detailed file about Sarah's performance. "Your instructors have consistently noted your reliability, your ability to work well within a team structure, and your steady improvement across all areas of evaluation." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I've been working hard to meet the standards expected of me." "I'm sure you have," Harrison said, and Sarah noticed that his tone carried a subtle undertone that suggested he was evaluating more than just her words. "I've been reviewing your background, and I'm impressed by your educational credentials and the leadership experience you gained during your college years. Tell me, what made you decide to enlist rather than pursuing a commission as an officer?" It was a reasonable question, one that Sarah had anticipated and prepared for during her initial planning. Many college graduates who joined the military chose to enter as officers rather than enlisting as regular soldiers, and her decision to take the enlisted route would naturally attract some curiosity. "I wanted to learn the military from the ground up, sir," Sarah replied, delivering the explanation she had rehearsed countless times. "I felt that serving as an enlisted soldier first would give me a better understanding of how the military really works, and make me a more effective leader if I decide to pursue a commission later in my career." Harrison nodded, making a note in her file. "That's a mature perspective, and one that suggests you've given serious thought to your military career. Your instructors have noted that you work well within the command structure and seem to have natural leadership instincts, even when you're not in a formal leadership position." Sarah felt a familiar tension in her shoulders. Comments about her leadership instincts and natural abilities were exactly the kind of attention she had been working to avoid. "I try to support my team however I can, sir. I learned in college that successful groups require everyone to contribute, not just the people in official leadership positions." "Exactly the kind of attitude we like to see," Harrison replied. "Now I want to discuss something that might interest you. We're always looking for soldiers with your combination of intelligence, reliability, and leadership potential for specialized training programs. These programs can lead to assignments that are both challenging and rewarding, though they also require a higher level of commitment and discretion." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she maintained her expression of polite interest. "What kind of specialized training, sir?" "There are several possibilities," Harrison said, closing her file and leaning back in his chair. "Intelligence analysis, for example, would make good use of your educational background. Or perhaps something in communications or logistics coordination, where your organizational skills would be valuable. These assignments often involve working with classified materials and interacting with personnel from other branches of the military and government agencies. The mention of classified materials and government agencies sent a chill down Sarah's spine. If Harrison was considering her for intelligence work, it could mean that someone had already begun investigating her background more thoroughly than she had anticipated. The thought that her carefully constructed cover story might be subjected to the kind of scrutiny that accompanied security clearances was deeply troubling. "Those sound like interesting opportunities, sir," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "What would be involved in the selection process?" "Additional interviews, more extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and specialized testing to assess your suitability for the work," Harrison replied. "It's a rigorous process, but soldiers who successfully complete it often find themselves with career opportunities that wouldn't be available through standard military channels." Sarah nodded as if she were seriously considering the offer, while internally she was calculating the risks and benefits of pursuing this path. On one hand, accepting the opportunity might provide her with access to information and resources that could be valuable to her real mission. On the other hand, the extensive vetting process Harrison had described would almost certainly uncover discrepancies in her background that could expose her true identity. "I'm definitely interested, sir," Sarah said finally. "When would I need to make a decision?" "No immediate rush," Harrison replied. "You still have several weeks of basic training ahead of you, and I'd want to see how you perform in the final exercises before making any formal recommendations. But I wanted to plant the idea now so you could give it some thought." "I appreciate that, sir. Is there anything specific I should be focusing on during the remainder of my training?" Harrison smiled, and Sarah noticed that it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just continue doing what you've been doing, Private. Maintain your current performance levels, continue working well with your team, and demonstrate the kind of reliability and judgment that would make you suitable for positions of increased responsibility." "Yes, sir, I'll do my best." "I'm confident you will," Harrison said, standing to signal that the meeting was concluded. "You're dismissed, Private Chen, and remember, this conversation is confidential. These types of opportunities are only discussed with selected personnel, and it's important that the process not be influenced by outside pressure or expectations." Sarah stood and saluted. "Understood, sir. Thank you for considering me for these opportunities." As she left Harrison's office and made her way back to the training area, Sarah's mind was churning with the implications of what had just occurred. The meeting had confirmed her suspicions that she was under closer scrutiny than she had realized, but it had also revealed that the attention might be working in her favor. If Harrison was genuinely considering her for specialized assignments, it suggested that her cover story was holding up under examination. At the same time, the prospect of additional background checks and psychological evaluations represented a significant risk. Sarah's cover identity had been carefully constructed to withstand routine scrutiny, but the kind of investigation that accompanied security clearances could potentially uncover inconsistencies or gaps that might raise uncomfortable questions. When she returned to the training area, Thompson immediately approached her with the kind of curiosity that had become familiar over their weeks together. "So how did it go?" he asked. "What did Harrison want to talk to you about?" Sarah had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that would satisfy Thompson's curiosity without revealing anything significant about the meeting. "Just routine stuff about my background and career goals. He wanted to make sure I was adapting well to military life and had some thoughts about potential assignments after graduation." "That's it?" Thompson looked slightly disappointed. "I was hoping it might be something more interesting, like special training or a leadership position." "Nothing that exciting," Sarah replied with a smile. "Just a standard check-in with someone who has a college degree." You know how the military is about paperwork and documentation. Thompson nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Well, if anything interesting comes up, let me know. I'd hate to miss out on any opportunities for advancement. Of course, Sarah said, though she had no intention of sharing any details about Harrison's actual proposals. As she rejoined the other recruits for their afternoon training session, she found herself facing a complex decision about how to proceed with her mission at Fort Bragg. The meeting with Harrison had opened up possibilities she hadn't anticipated, but it had also introduced risks that could potentially compromise everything she had been working toward. As she participated in the day's exercises, Sarah began developing a new strategy for navigating the challenges that lay ahead. The culminating exercise of their basic training program was designed to test everything the recruits had learned over the previous 10 weeks. Called Operation Nightfall, it was a 48-hour field exercise that would simulate real combat conditions, complete with opposing forces, limited resources, and scenarios that required both individual competence and team coordination. Sarah stood with her unit in the pre-dawn darkness, listening as Major Phillips outlined the exercise parameters. They would be divided into two forces, one defending a strategic position, the other attempting to capture it. The defending force would have the advantage of prepared positions and knowledge of the terrain, while the attacking force would have superior numbers and mobility. Both sides would be equipped with laser tag systems that would register hits and eliminate participants from the exercise. "This is your final examination," Phillips announced, his voice carrying across the assembled recruits. "Everything you've learned, marksmanship, tactics, leadership, teamwork, endurance, will be tested over the next 2 days. Your performance will be evaluated not just on whether you succeed in your mission, but on how well you adapt to changing circumstances and support your fellow soldiers." Sarah's unit had been assigned to the defending force, tasked with holding a fortified position that represented a critical communications hub. Thompson had been designated as their team leader, a recognition of the leadership skills he had demonstrated throughout training. Sarah found herself assigned as his second-in-command, a position that would require her to balance her desire to remain unremarkable with the responsibilities of helping to coordinate their defense as they moved into position. During the early morning hours, Sarah surveyed the terrain with the analytical eye that had become second nature to her. The defensive position was well chosen, situated on high ground with good fields of fire and multiple escape routes if retreat became necessary. However, she also noted several potential weak points in their perimeter that could be exploited by a determined attacking force. "What do you think, Chen?" Thompson asked as they established their command post in a camouflage shelter overlooking the main approach routes. "Any suggestions for how we should deploy our people?" Sarah studied the tactical map, carefully considering how to offer useful advice without revealing the full extent of her strategic knowledge. "I think we should put our strongest marksman on the left flank," she said, pointing to a position that would provide overlapping fields of fire. "That approach offers the best cover for attackers, so we'll need accurate shooting to discourage them from using it." "Good thinking," Thompson replied, making notes on his own map. "What about the right side?" "The terrain is more open there, so we might want to focus on early warning rather than trying to stop them with direct fire. If we can spot them early and call in their positions, we can coordinate our response better." It was exactly the kind of tactical thinking that might be expected from someone with good analytical skills and careful observation of their training exercises. Thompson implemented her suggestions as part of his overall defensive plan, and Sarah was pleased to see that her advice was being integrated naturally into the team's strategy. The first 12 hours of the exercise passed in tense anticipation. The defending force knew that the attackers were somewhere in the surrounding area, preparing their assault, but they had no way of knowing when or where the attack would come. Sarah used this time to quietly observe her fellow recruits, noting how they handled the stress of waiting and how they worked together to maintain their defensive positions. Rodriguez had been assigned to one of the forward observation posts, and Sarah could see that the responsibility was weighing heavily on him. His natural nervousness was amplified by the knowledge that his early warning could be crucial to their success, and he was clearly struggling with the pressure. Other recruits were handling the situation better, but Sarah could see signs of fatigue and tension beginning to affect the entire unit. "Thompson," she said quietly during one of their regular check-ins, "I think we should rotate the people in the observation posts. They've been out there for 8 hours, and their alertness is starting to drop." Thompson glanced at his watch and nodded. "You're right. Can you organize the rotation? I want to keep our best observers in position, but everyone needs to stay sharp." Sarah moved through their defensive perimeter, quietly coordinating the personnel changes with the kind of efficiency that had become her trademark. She made sure that each position remained fully manned during the transitions, and she took a moment to check on each recruit's condition and morale. By the time she returned to the command post, the entire defensive line had been refreshed and reinvigorated. "Nice work," Thompson said. "I was so focused on watching for the attack that I didn't notice how tired everyone was getting." "That's why you have a second in command," Sarah replied with a smile. "Someone needs to watch the details while you handle the big picture." The attack came at dawn on the second day, just as the defenders were beginning to think they might make it through the entire exercise without contact. It began with a series of probing actions against their left flank, exactly where Sarah had predicted the attackers would focus their initial efforts. The recruits in those positions called out contact reports, and Thompson began coordinating their response according to the plan they had developed. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of having to actively participate in the tactical decision-making while still maintaining her cover as a competent but unremarkable recruit. As reports came in from various positions, she helped Thompson process the information and coordinate their defensive efforts, offering suggestions and observations that demonstrated good judgment without revealing specialized knowledge. "They're trying to fix us in place while they move around our right flank," Sarah observed, studying the pattern of enemy contacts. "If we can shift some of our people to cover that approach, we might be able to catch them in a crossfire." Thompson immediately saw the logic in her assessment and began redeploying their defenders. Sarah coordinated the movement, ensuring that their original positions remained adequately covered while establishing new firing positions to address the flanking threat. The coordination required precise timing and clear communication skills that Sarah had to demonstrate without making it obvious that she possessed them. The battle that followed was intense, but brief. The attacking force had developed a solid plan, but their execution was hampered by the kind of small mistakes that were inevitable among recruits still learning to work together under pressure. Sarah's early identification of their flanking movement allowed the defenders to respond effectively, and Thompson's leadership kept the unit coordinated and focused. When the exercise concluded 6 hours later, the defending force had successfully held their position, though both sides had taken significant casualties in the final assault. Sarah had been killed during the last phase of the battle, hit by enemy fire while helping to coordinate the defense of their right flank. It was exactly the kind of heroic but not exceptional performance that fit her carefully maintained profile. Debriefing session following Operation Nightfall took place in the base's main conference room, with all the recruits gathered to review their performance and receive feedback from their instructors. Sarah sat with her unit, still wearing her mud-stained fatigues and feeling the pleasant exhaustion that came from 2 days of intense physical and mental effort. Major Phillips stood at the front of the room, flanked by several other officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, whose presence Sarah noted with particular interest. The debriefing began with a general review of the exercise objectives and an assessment of how well both the attacking and defending forces had performed their assigned missions. Overall, this was one of the most successful final exercises I've observed in several years, Phillips announced. Both forces demonstrated tactical competence, effective leadership, and the kind of teamwork that will serve you well in your future assignments. I want to highlight several individuals whose performance was particularly noteworthy. Sarah felt a familiar tension in her shoulders as Phillips began calling out specific names and achievements. She had performed well during the exercise, but she hoped that her contributions had been viewed as part of the team effort rather than individual accomplishments that might draw unwanted attention. Private Thompson, Phillips continued, your leadership of the defensive force was exemplary. You demonstrated the ability to make quick decisions under pressure, coordinate multiple elements effectively, and adapt your strategy based on changing circumstances. Well done. Thompson beamed with pride as his fellow recruits offered quiet congratulations. Sarah was genuinely pleased for him. His leadership had been instrumental in their success, and he deserved the recognition he was receiving. Private Chen, Phillips said, and Sarah's heart rate immediately increased. Your performance as second in command was equally impressive. Your tactical insights, coordination skills, and ability to maintain unit effectiveness under pressure demonstrate exactly the kind of leadership potential we look for in our soldiers. The praise was both gratifying and deeply concerning. Sarah had worked hard to contribute to their success, but she had also tried to do so in a way that wouldn't single her out for special attention. The fact that Phillips was specifically highlighting her performance suggested that her efforts to remain unremarkable had not been entirely successful. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, trying to project the appropriate mixture of pride and humility. I was just doing my job as part of the team. Modesty is an admirable quality, Phillips said, but false modesty serves no one. Your contributions were significant, and they've been noted by multiple observers during the exercise. As the debriefing continued, Sarah found herself increasingly aware of Harrison's attention. The lieutenant colonel wasn't taking notes, but his focus on her seemed more intense than his observation of the other recruits. When Phillips concluded his remarks and dismissed the group, Sarah wasn't surprised to see Harrison approach her before she could leave the room. Private Chen, Harrison said, could I have a word with you privately? Sarah followed Harrison to a small office adjacent to the conference room, her mind already racing through the possible implications of this second meeting. The fact that it was taking place immediately after the exercise debriefing suggested that her performance had indeed attracted the kind of official attention she had been hoping to avoid. Please sit down, Harrison said, closing the door behind them. I wanted to discuss your performance during the exercise and how it relates to our previous conversation about specialized training opportunities. Sarah settled into the offered chair, maintaining the same respectful demeanor she had displayed during their first meeting. Yes, sir, I hope my performance was satisfactory. More than satisfactory, Harrison replied. Your tactical awareness, leadership skills, and ability to function effectively under pressure were all exceptional. Major Phillips wasn't exaggerating when he said you demonstrated exactly the kind of potential we look for in our soldiers. I appreciate the feedback, sir. I learned a lot from working with Thompson and the rest of the team. Harrison opened a file folder and withdrew several sheets of paper covered with handwritten notes. I had observers specifically monitoring your performance during the exercise. Private Chen, their reports make for interesting reading. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the small office. The idea that she had been under specific observation during the exercise was troubling enough, but the fact that Harrison was presenting it as a routine matter suggested that such scrutiny might be more common than she had realized. For example, Harrison continued, reading from one of the reports, you correctly identified the enemy's flanking movement approximately 20 minutes before it became obvious to other defenders. Your suggested redeployment of personnel was Tactically sound and ultimately prevented what could have been a successful enemy breakthrough. "I got lucky with that observation, sir," Sarah said, though she was beginning to realize that her careful efforts to downplay her contributions might not be having the desired effect. "Perhaps," Harrison said, "but luck tends to favor those who are prepared to recognize and act on opportunities. Tell me, Private Chen, have you given any more thought to the specialized training opportunities we discussed?" Sarah found herself facing a crucial decision. Harrison's continued interest in her capabilities suggested that refusing his offer might actually draw more attention than accepting it. At the same time, agreeing to additional training and evaluation could expose her to exactly the kind of scrutiny that could compromise her mission. "I'm very interested, sir," Sarah said finally. "What would be the next step in the process?" "Additional interviews and evaluations, as I mentioned before," Harrison replied. "But first, I want to have a more detailed conversation about your background and qualifications. There are some aspects of your service record that I'd like to explore further." The mention of her service record sent another chill through Sarah's system. If Harrison had identified discrepancies or gaps in her background information, it could mean that her cover was already compromised. "What kind of aspects, sir?" "Nothing dramatic," Harrison said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just some questions about your educational background, your decision to enlist rather than seeking a commission, and your apparent familiarity with certain tactical concepts that aren't typically covered in civilian education." Sarah realized that she was approaching a critical juncture in her mission. Harrison's questions were becoming increasingly specific, and his interest in her background was clearly more than routine. She would need to decide whether to continue trying to maintain her cover or to take a more proactive approach to managing the situation. "I understand, sir. When would you like to have this conversation?" "Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours. Same location as our previous meeting. And Private Chen, this conversation will also be confidential. I trust you understand the importance of discretion in these matters." "Yes, sir, I'll be there." As Sarah left the office and returned to her barracks, she found herself facing the most challenging decision of her mission so far. Harrison's continued interest could provide her with access to information and opportunities that would be valuable to her real objectives, but it also represented a significant risk to her carefully constructed cover identity. Sarah spent the evening preparing for what she sensed would be the most crucial conversation of her time at Fort Bragg. She reviewed every aspect of her cover story, anticipating the questions Harrison might ask and preparing responses that would maintain her fictional identity while potentially opening doors to whatever specialized opportunities he was considering. At 0800 hours sharp, she stood outside Harrison's office wearing her dress uniform and carrying herself with the confidence of a soldier who had successfully completed basic training. The previous day's exercise had marked the end of their formal training program, and most of her fellow recruits were already making preparations for their next assignments. Sarah, however, found herself facing an uncertain future that would depend largely on the outcome of this meeting. "Private Chen reporting, as ordered, sir," she announced after being granted permission to enter. Harrison's office looked exactly as it had during their previous meeting, with the same precise organization and formal atmosphere. However, Sarah noticed that there were additional files on his desk, suggesting that he had been conducting more extensive research into her background. "At ease, Private," Harrison said, gesturing toward the familiar chair across from his desk. "I want to begin by congratulating you on your successful completion of basic training. Your performance throughout the program has been exemplary, and you should be proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, sir. It's been a challenging but rewarding experience." "I'm sure it has," Harrison replied, opening one of the files on his desk. "Now I want to discuss some questions that have arisen during my review of your background and qualifications. I hope you'll understand that these inquiries are routine for the kind of specialized assignments I've mentioned." Sarah nodded, maintaining her expression of polite attention while internally preparing for what was to come. "First, I want to revisit your educational background," Harrison continued. "You graduated from Stanford with a degree in international relations, correct?" "Yes, sir. I concentrated on East Asian studies with a focus on political and economic development." "Excellent preparation for certain types of military intelligence work," Harrison noted. "Did you study any languages during your time there?" "I speak Mandarin and some Japanese," Sarah replied, which was true and already documented in her records. "I also studied some Korean, though I'm not as fluent in that." Harrison made a note in his file. Very useful skills. "Now I'm curious about your decision to enlist rather than pursuing a commission. Most Stanford graduates who join the military choose to become officers. What influenced your decision to take a different path?" Sarah delivered the same explanation she had given previously about wanting to understand the military from the ground up. Harrison listened with apparent interest, but she could see that he was evaluating her response for more than just its surface meaning. "That's a commendable approach," Harrison said when she finished. "However, I've been reviewing your performance during training, and I'm struck by the fact that you seem to possess certain skills and knowledge that would be unusual for someone with your stated background." This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. Harrison's statement was carefully phrased, but it was clearly an invitation for her to explain apparent discrepancies in her background. "What kind of skills, sir?" "Your tactical awareness, for one thing," Harrison replied. "During the final exercise, you demonstrated an understanding of military strategy and battlefield dynamics that goes well beyond what most recruits learn during basic training. Your instructors have noted similar observations throughout your time here." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I did a lot of reading about military history and tactics during college, sir. I found it intellectually interesting, and I thought it might be useful if I decided to pursue a military career." "Perhaps," Harrison said, "but there's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application. Your performance suggests more than just academic study." The conversation was approaching dangerous territory, and Sarah realized that she would need to make a decision about how much of the truth to reveal. Harrison's continued questioning suggested that he had already identified inconsistencies in her background, and continuing to maintain her cover story might actually be more suspicious than admitting to certain facts. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "I may have understated some aspects of my background. I didn't want to seem like I was trying to show off or claim special treatment." Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of increased interest. "What aspects?" "I did some additional training during college that might be relevant," Sarah said, choosing her words with extreme care. "I participated in some programs that weren't widely advertised, and I signed confidentiality agreements that limit what I can discuss about them." It was a carefully constructed half-truth that might explain her apparent skills without revealing the full extent of her background. Harrison's reaction would tell her whether this approach was working or whether she needed to take a different strategy. "What kind of programs?" Harrison asked, his tone becoming more focused. "Military simulation exercises, advanced leadership training, that sort of thing," Sarah replied. "Nothing official, but more comprehensive than what most college students would have access to." Harrison studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could see that he was weighing her explanation against whatever information he had already gathered. The silence stretched between them, filled with the kind of tension that comes when both parties know that important truths are being negotiated. "Private Chen," Harrison said finally, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to give me a direct answer. Are you exactly who you appear to be in your service records?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The question was more direct than she had expected, and it suggested that Harrison's suspicions were more specific than she had realized. She found herself at a crossroads where her response would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially the success or failure of her entire mission. "Sir," she said slowly, "I think there might be some things about my background that aren't immediately apparent from my official records. If you're asking whether I have additional training or experience that might be relevant to certain types of assignments, the answer is yes." "I thought so," Harrison said, and Sarah was surprised to hear what sounded like satisfaction in his voice. "Private Chen, I think it's time we had a more complete conversation about who you really are and why you're here at Fort Bragg." The weight of Harrison's words hung in the air between them like a challenge that could no longer be avoided. Sarah realized that she had reached the point where her carefully constructed cover story was no longer sufficient, and that her next words would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her mission at Fort Bragg. "Sir," Sarah said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who understood that careers and lives could hang in the balance, "I think there may be some confusion about my background and my reasons for being here." Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the intelligence analyst behind his military bearing. "I don't think there's any confusion, Private Chen. I think there's been a deliberate effort to create confusion, and I'd like to understand why." The directness of his statement forced Sarah to make a critical decision. She could continue to maintain her cover, hoping that Harrison's suspicions were based on incomplete information, or she could begin to reveal selected aspects of her true background in an effort to control the narrative. "What exactly do you think you know about me, sir?" "I know that your performance during training has been carefully calibrated to appear competent but unremarkable," Harrison replied. "I know that you possess tactical knowledge and situational awareness that suggests significantly more training than what appears in your records. And I know that certain aspects of your background don't quite align with the story you've been telling." Sarah felt a familiar calm settling over her, the kind of mental clarity that came when a situation moved beyond uncertainty into active crisis management. "And what conclusions have you drawn from those observations?" "I've concluded that you're not just another college graduate who decided to serve her country," Harrison said. "I think you're here for reasons that have nothing to do with basic military training, and I think it's time we discussed what those reasons might be." The moment had arrived when Sarah would need to decide how much of her true identity to reveal. Harrison's questioning had become too specific and too persistent to deflect with her original cover story, but revealing the full truth could compromise not just her mission but potentially national security interests that went far beyond Fort Bragg. "Sir," Sarah said, "before we continue this conversation, I need to know something. Are you asking these questions in your capacity as Deputy Training Commander, or is there another reason for your interest in my background?" Harrison's slight smile suggested that he had been expecting this question. "Let's just say that my responsibilities at Fort Bragg extend beyond basic training evaluation. I have interests in identifying individuals with certain capabilities who might be suitable for specialized assignments." "What kind of specialized assignments?" "The kind that require people with backgrounds that don't necessarily appear in their official service records," Harrison replied. "The kind that might benefit from someone who has received training that goes beyond what's typically available to college students." Sarah realized that Harrison was offering her an opportunity to reveal her background in a context that might actually serve her mission objectives. If he was indeed involved in recruitment for specialized military programs, her true identity might be an asset rather than a liability. "Sir, if I were to tell you that my background includes training and experience that doesn't appear in my official records, would that information be treated with appropriate discretion?" "That would depend on the nature of the information," Harrison sighed. "But I can assure you that conversations about specialized assignments are always handled with the highest levels of security and confidentiality." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would irrevocably change her situation at Fort Bragg. "My name is Sarah Chen, and I am a college graduate who decided to serve my country. However, my path to military service was not as straightforward as my records suggest. Harrison leaned forward slightly, his attention focused completely on her words. I was recruited during my senior year at Stanford, Sarah continued, by people who were interested in my language skills, my academic background, and my potential for certain types of government service. I received additional training that prepared me for assignments that would require both military knowledge and specialized skills. What kind of training? Advanced tactical training, intelligence analysis, cultural immersion programs, and other preparation that would be useful for someone working in complex international environments, Sarah replied, keeping her explanation general enough to avoid compromising operational security, while being specific enough to satisfy Harrison's curiosity. And your assignment to Fort Bragg? I was told that military training would be valuable preparation for my future assignments, Sarah said. I was also told that it would be important for me to understand how regular military units operate, from the perspective of someone who had experienced the training process firsthand. Harrison nodded slowly, as if Sarah's explanation was confirming suspicions he had already formed. Who recruited you, Private Chen? I signed confidentiality agreements that limit what I can discuss about my recruitment and training, Sarah replied. But I can tell you that it was done through official channels with appropriate security clearances and oversight. I see, Harrison said, making notes in his file. And now that you've completed basic training, what are your next instructions? Sarah realized that this question would determine whether Harrison was simply a curious training commander or whether he was connected to the same networks that had originally recruited her. Her answer would need to be carefully crafted to elicit information about his own role while revealing minimal details about her actual mission. I was told that my next assignment would be determined based on my performance during training and the needs of the service, Sarah said. I was also told that opportunities might arise that would make use of my specialized background. Opportunities like the ones I've been discussing with you? Perhaps, sir. That would depend on what those opportunities involve and whether they align with my original instructions. Harrison closed his file and leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with an expression that suggested he was reaching some kind of decision about how to proceed. Private Chen, he said finally, I think it's time we discussed your real call sign. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Harrison's mention of a real call sign meant that her cover hadn't just been compromised, it had been completely penetrated. The question now was whether Harrison was friend or foe, and what his knowledge of her true identity would mean for her mission. Sir, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was evaluating her response as much as her words. I think you do know what I mean, Private Chen, or should I say Agent Chen? The use of her operational title confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Harrison knew far more about her background than she had realized, and his knowledge suggested connections to intelligence networks that went well beyond Fort Bragg's normal operations. I'm not sure how to respond to that, sir, Sarah replied, falling back on training that had taught her to neither confirm nor deny when faced with potential exposure. You can respond by telling me the truth, Harrison said, his voice taking on more authoritative tone. Your real name, your real organization, and your real purpose for being here at Fort Bragg. Sarah found herself facing a decision that would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially the success or failure of an operation that had been months in the planning. Harrison's knowledge of her true identity suggested that he was connected to the same intelligence networks that had originally deployed her, but it could also mean that her cover had been blown by hostile forces. Sir, before I answer that question, I need to know who's asking it, Sarah said. Are you speaking as Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, Deputy Training Commander, or are you representing other interests? Harrison's slight smile suggested that he had been expecting this response. "I'm speaking as someone who has been waiting for you to arrive at Fort Bragg. Agent Chen, someone who has been monitoring your training and waiting for the right moment to make contact." The revelation that Harrison had been expecting her arrival fundamentally changed Sarah's understanding of her situation. If he had been monitoring her training as part of an official operation, it meant that her mission had been coordinated at levels she hadn't been informed about. "You've been waiting for me?" "For someone like you," Harrison corrected. "We've been expecting that certain intelligence assets would be deployed to Fort Bragg as part of their training and preparation. Your particular skill set and background made you a logical candidate for such an assignment." Sarah realized that she was being drawn into a conversation that could expose operational details that might compromise not just her mission, but potentially other operations as well. She needed to determine Harrison's true role before revealing any additional information about her background. "Sir, I appreciate your candor, but I need to verify your credentials before we continue this conversation," Sarah said. "I'm sure you understand the importance of proper authorization for discussions of this nature." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Excellent. That's exactly the kind of operational security awareness we'd expect from someone with your training." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small device that Sarah recognized as a secure communication unit. "I'm going to place a call that will verify my authorization to have this conversation with you." Sarah watched as Harrison input a complex series of codes into the device. The brief conversation that followed was conducted in a mixture of official terminology and coded phrases that confirmed he was indeed connected to the intelligence networks that had originally recruited her. "Agent Chen," Harrison said after ending the call, "I've been authorized to read you into Operation Night Watch. Your training at Fort Bragg has been part of a larger mission that required you to establish credible military credentials while maintaining your cover identity." The mention of Operation Night Watch sent a chill through Sarah's system. It was a code name she had heard referenced during her initial briefings, but she had been told that she would be read into the operation only when her preparation was complete. "What does that mean for my current status?" "It means that your basic training phase is complete and you're ready to begin the next phase of your preparation," Harrison replied. "The specialized training opportunities I mentioned earlier weren't just career advancement, they were cover for advanced intelligence training that will prepare you for your actual assignment." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that her cover hadn't been blown by hostile forces, but apprehension about what the next phase of her mission might involve. What kind of assignment? Deep cover intelligence work in environments where your military training and cultural background will be essential, Harrison said. Assignments that require someone who can operate as both a soldier and an intelligence analyst, with the kind of authentic military experience that can't be faked. And my fellow recruits? They continue with their regular assignments completely unaware of your true identity or purpose, Harrison replied. As far as they're concerned, you're Sarah Chen, a competent soldier who completed basic training and moved on to specialized military education. Sarah realized that her carefully maintained cover story had actually been serving a dual purpose. It had protected her true identity from her fellow recruits while also providing her with the authentic military experience that would be crucial for her future assignments. When do I begin this specialized training? Immediately, Harrison said. Your orders are being cut as we speak. Officially, you're being assigned to a military intelligence training program at Fort Huachuca. Unofficially, you'll be receiving the kind of preparation that will make you one of the most effective deep cover operatives in the intelligence community. And my call sign? Harrison's expression grew more serious. That information is classified at levels that require additional security clearances. But I can tell you that it reflects both your capabilities and the importance of the missions you'll be undertaking. Sarah understood that she was being told as much as operational security would allow. The fact that Harrison wouldn't reveal her call sign suggested that it was connected to programs that operated at the highest levels of government. "Sir, I have one more question," Sarah said. "How long have you known about my true identity?" "I've known since before you arrived at Fort Bragg," Harrison replied. "My role here includes identifying and shepherding intelligence assets through their military training. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." The revelation that Harrison had been managing her training from the beginning explained many of the subtle ways her experience had been different from that of her fellow recruits. The additional attention, the careful evaluation of her performance, the opportunities to demonstrate leadership, all of it had been part of a carefully orchestrated process. "Your performance during training has been exemplary," Harrison continued. "You successfully maintained your cover while demonstrating the kind of skills and judgment that will be essential for your future assignments. Your instructors' reports, your fellow recruits' assessments, and my own observations all confirm that you're ready for the next phase of your preparation." Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment mixed with anticipation. The months of careful performance, the constant vigilance required to maintain her cover, the challenge of excelling while appearing ordinary, all of it had been leading to this moment. "When do I report for my new assignment?" "Tomorrow morning," Harrison said. "You'll be processed out of Fort Bragg through normal channels, with orders to report to Fort Huachuca for military intelligence training. Your cover story will be that you were selected for this program based on your performance during basic training and your educational background. And my fellow recruits, they'll be told that you received an excellent assignment that reflects your potential for advanced military service," Harrison replied. "It's exactly the kind of opportunity that someone with your apparent qualifications might reasonably expect." Sarah nodded, understanding that her departure from Fort Bragg would be as carefully orchestrated as her arrival had been. Her fellow recruits would see her success as a natural progression of her military career, never suspecting that they had been training alongside someone whose true mission was far more complex than anything they could imagine. The news of Sarah's assignment to Fort Huachuca was met with the kind of congratulatory enthusiasm that she had expected from her fellow recruits. Thompson was particularly pleased, viewing her selection for military intelligence training as validation of the leadership potential he had observed during their time together. "I knew you had something special," Thompson said as they gathered in the mess hall for what would be their last meal together as a training unit. "The way you handled yourself during the final exercise, your tactical insights, your ability to keep everyone focused, it all pointed to someone who was destined for bigger things." Sarah smiled, genuinely touched by his words even as she was aware of the irony in his assessment. "I learned a lot from working with you, Thompson. Your leadership during the exercise was what made everything else possible." Rodriguez, meanwhile, was characteristically emotional about her departure. "I'm going to miss having you around, Chen. You always seem to know exactly what to say to keep me from panicking during the tough exercises." "You're stronger than you think, Rodriguez," Sarah replied. "You completed every challenge they threw at us, and you did it with the kind of determination that will serve you well in whatever assignment you get." As she moved through the familiar ritual of saying goodbye to her fellow recruits, Sarah found herself genuinely affected by the relationships she had formed during their training. These young men and women had been more than just cover for her mission. They had been companions who had shared one of the most challenging experiences of their lives. Martinez, the quiet recruit who had joined their unit during the middle of training, approached her with the kind of shy respect that had characterized his interactions with everyone throughout their time together. "I wanted to thank you for helping me fit in when I first arrived," he said. "I know it wasn't easy to have someone new join the group, but you made me feel welcome from the first day." Sarah remembered the extra effort she had made to include Martinez in their unit's activities, partly because it fit her cover as a supportive team member, but also because she had genuinely sympathized with his situation. We all needed to work together to succeed, Martinez. You earned your place in this unit through your own hard work and dedication. The afternoon was spent completing the administrative tasks that accompanied any military reassignment. Sarah processed through the same bureaucratic machinery that handled all personnel transfers, receiving new orders, updating her service records, and arranging for the shipment of her personal belongings. To all external appearances, she was simply another soldier moving from one training program to another. But beneath the routine paperwork and standard procedures, Sarah was acutely aware that she was transitioning from one phase of her intelligence career to another. The months at Fort Bragg had provided her with authentic military experience and credible credentials, but they had also been a testing ground for her ability to maintain deep cover while operating under constant scrutiny. That evening, she sat in her barracks room, completing the final entries in the journal she had maintained throughout her training. To anyone who might have read it, the journal would have appeared to be the personal reflections of a college graduate adapting to military life, documenting her challenges, her growth, and her relationships with fellow recruits. In reality, it had been a carefully crafted component of her cover story, designed to reinforce her fictional identity, while providing a plausible reason for her habit of making detailed observations about her environment. Now, as she prepared to close this chapter of her mission, she found herself reviewing the entries with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal nostalgia. The person she had pretended to be during her time at Fort Bragg had, in many ways, become real through the experiences she had shared with her fellow recruits. The challenges they had faced together, the bonds they had formed, the growth they had all experienced. These had been genuine human connections that transcended the operational requirements of her mission. A knock at her door interrupted her reflections. Thompson stood in the hallway, looking somewhat embarrassed but determined. "I wanted to give you this," he said, holding out a small item that Sarah recognized as one of the unit patches they had all received after completing their final exercise. "I know it's not much, but I thought you might want something to remember your time here." Sarah accepted the patch with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Thompson. I'll treasure it." "You know," Thompson said, "I've been thinking about what made our unit work so well together. It wasn't just the training or the exercises. It was the way people like you made everyone feel like they were part of something important. You've got a gift for bringing out the best in people." "I think we all brought out the best in each other," Sarah replied. "That's what made us successful." After Thompson left, Sarah carefully placed the unit patch in her personal belongings. It would serve as a reminder of the time when she had been, in many ways, exactly who she had pretended to be, a dedicated soldier, learning to serve her country alongside others who shared the same commitment. The next morning brought the familiar routine of formation, inspection, and final administrative tasks. Sarah stood with her fellow recruits one last time, listening as Staff Sergeant Martinez delivered his final remarks to the graduating class. "You came here as civilians and you're leaving as soldiers," Martinez announced. "You've learned to work as a team, to push yourselves beyond what you thought possible, and to uphold the values that make our military strong. Whatever assignments you receive, whatever challenges you face, remember that you have the training and the character to succeed." As the formation was dismissed and the recruits began to disperse to their various new assignments, Sarah felt the weight of transition settling over her. The Sarah Chen who had arrived at Fort Bragg 10 weeks earlier had been a carefully constructed fiction. The Sarah Chen who was leaving was someone who had genuinely earned her place among these soldiers, even if they would never know the full truth about her identity or her mission. The departure from Fort Bragg was as carefully orchestrated as everything else in Sarah's experience there. She processed through the same administrative channels as any other soldier receiving new orders, collected her gear from the same supply sergeants who had issued it months earlier, and said her final farewells to the drill sergeants who had shaped her training experience. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached her as she was loading her belongings into the transport vehicle that would take her to the airport. "Chun," he said, "I wanted to tell you that it's been a pleasure having you in my training unit. You've got the kind of steady character that makes for a good soldier, and I expect you'll do well in whatever assignment they give you." "Thank you, Sergeant Martinez," Sarah replied. "Your training made all the difference in preparing me for what comes next." Martinez nodded, then hesitated as if he wanted to say something more. "You know, in 20 years of training recruits, you develop an instinct for spotting the ones who are going to make a real difference in the service. You've got that quality, Chun. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the transport vehicle pulled away from Fort Bragg, Sarah watched through the rear window as the familiar buildings and training areas disappeared behind them. She was leaving behind not just a military installation, but a carefully constructed identity that had served its purpose and would now be replaced by something new. The flight to Fort Huachuca was routine, filled with the kind of administrative travel that characterized military life. Sarah sat among other soldiers who were also traveling to new assignments, some excited about their opportunities, others nervous about the challenges ahead. To all appearances, she was simply another member of this transient military community. When she arrived at Fort Huachuca and reported to the designated processing center, the routine nature of her transfer began to change. Instead of the standard reception process she had experienced at Fort Bragg, Sarah was directed to a secure facility where she was met by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Ms. Anderson. "Agent Chun," Anderson said, "welcome to the next phase of your preparation. I trust your experience at Fort Bragg was successful." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I completed the training program and established the necessary credentials." "Excellent. Your performance reports indicate that you successfully maintained your cover while demonstrating the kind of capabilities we'll need for your future assignments. Now we can begin your real preparation." Anderson led Sarah through a series of security checkpoints and into a building that bore no resemblance to the standard military facilities she had become accustomed to. The interior was more like a corporate training center with modern equipment, comfortable furniture, and an atmosphere that suggested serious professional development rather than military indoctrination. "This is where you'll be spending the next several months," Anderson explained. "The program you're entering is officially designated as Advanced Military Intelligence Training, but it's actually much more comprehensive than that title suggests. You'll be learning skills that will prepare you for deep cover operations in some of the most challenging environments in the world." Sarah was shown to quarters that were significantly more comfortable than the barracks she had occupied at Fort Bragg. The room was private, well-appointed, and equipped with the kind of technology that suggested access to classified information systems. "Tomorrow you'll begin meeting with your instructors and fellow trainees," Anderson continued. "Some of them, like you, are coming from military backgrounds. Others have been recruited from different sectors. All of them have been selected for their potential to contribute to operations that are critical to national security." "How many people are in the program?" "That information is classified," Anderson replied. "But I can tell you that you'll be working with a small, carefully selected group of individuals who share your commitment to serving in roles that require exceptional skill and absolute discretion." That evening, Sarah sat in her new room reviewing the materials that had been provided for her orientation. The documents outlined a training program that would cover everything from advanced language skills to sophisticated surveillance techniques, from cultural immersion to cutting-edge technology applications. As she read through the curriculum, Sarah realized that her time at Fort Bragg had been only the first step in a much longer and more complex preparation process. The military training she had received would provide her with credible credentials and authentic experience, but the real skills she would need for her future assignments were still to be developed. The next morning brought her first meeting with the program director, a man who introduced himself as Colonel Peterson. Unlike the military officer she had worked with at Fort Bragg, Peterson wore civilian clothes and spoke with the kind of authority that suggested connections to the highest levels of government. "Agent Chen," Peterson said, "you've successfully completed the first phase of your preparation. Your performance at Fort Bragg demonstrated that you can maintain deep cover while operating in challenging environments. Now we're going to develop the specialized skills that will make you one of our most effective operatives." What kind of operations am I being prepared for? Long-term deep cover assignments in locations where your military background and cultural knowledge will be essential, Peterson replied. Assignments that require someone who can function as both a soldier and an intelligence analyst, with the kind of authentic experience that can't be simulated. Peterson opened a file that contained what appeared to be a detailed dossier about Sarah's background, training, and psychological profile. Your language skills, your educational background, your proven ability to maintain cover under pressure. All of these factors make you ideally suited for assignments that are critical to national security. And my call sign? Peterson smiled, and Sarah noticed that his expression carried a weight that suggested he was about to reveal something significant. Your call sign, Agent Chen, is Phoenix. It reflects both your ability to assume new identities and your capacity for rising to meet extraordinary challenges. The name sent a chill through Sarah's system. She had heard whispered references to Phoenix during her initial recruitment, but she had been told that such operational designations were reserved for agents with the highest security clearances and the most sensitive assignments. Phoenix is a designation that comes with significant responsibility, Peterson continued. It identifies you as someone who has been prepared for operations that require the ultimate in skill, judgment, and dedication. It's a call sign that very few people earn, and even fewer know about. Sarah understood that she was being inducted into a level of intelligence operations that existed at the very highest levels of government. The months of careful preparation, the elaborate cover stories, the extensive training, all of it had been leading to this moment when she would assume her true identity as one of the nation's most elite operatives. When do I begin my real assignments? Soon, Peterson replied. But first, you need to complete your advanced training. When you're ready, Phoenix will be deployed to locations where your unique combination of skills can serve the national interest in ways that conventional military or intelligence operations cannot. As Sarah left Peterson's office and began her new phase of training, she realized that her journey from college graduate to deep cover operative was entering its final stage. The Sarah Chen who had arrived at Fort Bragg as an ordinary recruit had been transformed into Phoenix, an agent whose true capabilities would soon be tested in the most challenging environments the intelligence community could imagine. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.